Louis Armstrong discovered the scam that destroyed young musicians' dreams. When he exposed the truth, it almost ended his own career. Louis Armstrong was counting his blessings in his Milwaukee hotel room when the young man started crying. It was March 8, 1960, and Louis had just finished the most successful tour of the Midwest he'd ever had. Radio stations were playing his records, concert halls were selling out, and his latest album was climbing the charts. Life was good for Satchmo, better than he'd dared hope when he was growing up poor in New Orleans. But the young man sitting across from him, 17-year-old Bobby Chen, was living Louis's worst nightmare. Bobby had talent that could have taken him anywhere, a trumpet tone so pure it made angels weep. Instead, he was broke, homeless, and holding a contract that had promised him everything but delivered only heartbreak. The man who had destroyed Bobby's dreams was Eddie Big Voice Sullivan, Milwaukee's most popular radio host and the man who had been promoting Louis Armstrong's music for the past 5 years. Sullivan's late-night jazz show reached 3 states, and when Big Voice Sullivan told his listeners to buy a record, they bought it. When he recommended a concert, they attended it. When he praised a musician, that musician's career took off like a rocket. What Louis discovered in that hotel room changed everything he thought he knew about success, friendship, and the price of staying silent when you witness evil. This is the story of the night Louis Armstrong had to choose between his career and his conscience, between loyalty to a friend and justice for strangers, between the man who made him famous and the children that man was destroying. To understand why Bobby Chen's story hit Louis so hard, you need to understand what that young trumpet player represented. Bobby was everything Louis had been as a teenager, hungry, talented, and desperate for a chance to prove himself. He'd grown up in Milwaukee's 3rd Ward, the son of Chinese immigrants who had come to America with nothing but hope and determination. Bobby's father, Wei Chen, worked 16-hour days in a restaurant kitchen to support his family. His mother, Lynn, took in laundry and mended clothes for wealthy families on the East Side. They had sacrificed everything to give their son opportunities they'd never had, including paying for trumpet lessons that cost more than they could afford. By the time Bobby turned 16, he was the most promising young musician in Milwaukee. He could play jazz, classical, and blues with equal skill. His high school band director said Bobby had the potential to earn a full scholarship to any music conservatory in the country. Local musicians who heard him play shook their heads in amazement and predicted he'd be famous within 5 years. That's when Bobby heard about the Big Voice Sullivan Talent Discovery Program. Eddie Sullivan had been Milwaukee's premier radio personality for 15 years. His show, Midnight Jazz with Big Voice, aired every night from 11 p.m. to 2 a.m. on WMIL, the most powerful radio station in the state. Sullivan was beloved by musicians and fans alike, known for discovering new talent and giving young artists their first big break. But Sullivan was also running the cruelest scam in the music business. The Big Voice Sullivan Talent Discovery Program promised young musicians professional recording sessions, management representation, and guaranteed radio play for their songs. All they had to do was pay a $500 investment fee to cover studio costs and promotional expenses. For families like the Chens, $500 was more than they made in 2 months. But Sullivan painted such a convincing picture of success that desperate parents found ways to scrape together the money. Bobby's parents mortgaged their small house to pay Sullivan's fee. They believed they were investing in their son's future, buying him a ticket out of poverty and into a career that would honor the family name. Lin Chen cried tears of joy the day Bobby signed his contract with Big Voice Sullivan Productions. That was 6 months ago. Since then, Bobby had recorded 3 songs in a shabby studio on Milwaukee's South Side. The recordings were amateurish, the equipment was ancient, and Sullivan had promised radio play that never materialized. Worse, when Bobby tried to contact Sullivan about the next steps in his career, the radio host became evasive, then hostile, then threatening. "Kid," Sullivan had told Bobby the last time they spoke, "you got what you paid for. A recording session. If you want more, that's going to cost extra. And if you start making trouble, spreading rumors about my program, well, let's just say it would be a shame if word got around that you're difficult to work with." Bobby's dream was dead, and his family was facing foreclosure on their home. He'd spent the last 2 weeks sleeping in the YMCA and looking for work to help his parents save the house. That's how he'd ended up in Louis Armstrong's hotel room, sent by a mutual friend who thought Louis might hire Bobby for occasional session work. Louis had agreed to the meeting expecting to discuss a simple business arrangement. Instead, he found himself listening to a story that made his blood boil. "Mr. Armstrong," Bobby said, his voice breaking. "I know I made a mistake trusting Mr. Sullivan. I know I should have been smarter. But there are others, lots of others. Kids who gave him their life savings, their parents' money, everything they had, and he just takes it and gives them nothing." Louis set down his trumpet and looked at this young man who reminded him so much of himself at that age. Talented, hopeful, and now broken by a system that preyed on dreams. "How many others, Bobby?" "At least 30 that I know of, maybe more. African-American kids, Mexican kids, Polish kids from the South Side. Anyone who's good enough to dream but poor enough to be desperate." Louis felt a familiar rage building in his chest. It was the same anger he'd felt watching segregation destroy lives, the same fury that had driven him to speak out against injustice, even when it hurt his career. But this time, the situation was more complicated. Eddie Sullivan wasn't just some random criminal. He was the man who had championed Louis's music when other DJs were afraid to play it. He was the reason Louis had sold out concerts across the Midwest, the voice that had told millions of listeners that Louis Armstrong was the greatest musician alive. Sullivan's support had been worth hundreds of thousands of dollars in record sales and concert bookings. More than that, it had given Louis credibility with white audiences who might never have discovered jazz without Sullivan's endorsement. Destroying Sullivan would mean destroying one of Louis's most important professional relationships. But looking at Bobby Chen's tear-stained face, Louis knew he couldn't stay silent. "Bobby, I want you to tell me everything. Every detail, every conversation, every promise he made, and I want names and addresses of the other kids he's hurt." For the next 3 hours, Bobby laid out the scope of Sullivan's operation. It was bigger and more ruthless than Louis had imagined. Sullivan had been running the scam for at least 5 years, targeting talented young musicians from poor families. He'd stolen an estimated $15,000 from more than 30 families, leaving dreams shattered and lives ruined in his wake. The contracts the kids signed were carefully worded to be technically legal while being morally despicable. Sullivan provided what he promised, recording sessions and studio time. But the recordings were worthless, the studio was a fraud, and the promises of radio play and management representation were verbal commitments that weren't legally binding. Most devastating of all, Sullivan specifically targeted minority children and immigrants' families who wouldn't know how to fight back through the legal system. He counted on their lack of resources, their unfamiliarity with American business practices, and their fear of authority figures to keep them quiet when they realized they'd been cheated. "Mr. Armstrong," Bobby said as the conversation wound down, "I don't expect you to help me. I know Mr. Sullivan is your friend, and I know he's helped your career. But maybe you could just warn people, let them know to be careful." Louis looked at this 17-year-old boy who was trying to protect other children, even though his own life was in ruins. In that moment, Louis made a decision that would change everything. "Bobby, I'm not just going to warn people. I'm going to destroy Eddie Sullivan." The plan Louis devised was elegant, dangerous, and completely dependent on his willingness to sacrifice his relationship with one of the most powerful men in Midwest radio. First, Louis hired a private detective to investigate Sullivan's business practices and gather evidence of fraud. The detective, a former police officer named Mike Kowalski, had handled cases for other entertainers and understood both the music business and Milwaukee's criminal justice system. Second, Louis contacted a lawyer who specialized in consumer fraud. The lawyer, Sarah Mitchell, was one of the few female attorneys in Milwaukee and had built her reputation fighting for working-class families against powerful businesses. Third, and most importantly, Louis decided to confront Sullivan directly, not as an accuser, but as a friend seeking clarification about disturbing rumors he'd heard. The meeting was set for March 15, 1960, at Sullivan's radio station. Louis arrived with his usual easy smile and friendly demeanor, giving no indication that he was about to conduct the most important interrogation of his life. "Pops!" Sullivan boomed when Louis walked into the studio. "What brings you to my little corner of paradise?" Eddie Sullivan was a big man in every sense of the word. 6 feet 4 inches tall, 280 pounds, with a voice that could rattle windows and a personality that filled every room he entered. He wore expensive suits, drove a Cadillac, and lived in a mansion on Milwaukee's east side. The money for that lifestyle came from more than just radio advertising. "Eddie, my friend," Louis said, settling into a chair across from Sullivan's desk. "I wanted to talk to you about something that's been bothering me." Sullivan's expression didn't change, but Louis noticed his shoulders tense slightly. "What's on your mind, Pops?" "I've been hearing stories, Eddie. Stories about young musicians, kids who are paying you money for recording contracts that don't work out. Now, I know these are probably just rumors, but I figured I should ask you directly." Sullivan's face darkened. "Who's been spreading rumors?" Louis shrugged. "You know how the music community is. People talk, but I told them there had to be some misunderstanding. You wouldn't take advantage of kids, right? You're too good a man for that." "Damn right I wouldn't," Sullivan said, his voice rising. "I run a legitimate talent development program. I invest my own money in young artists, give them opportunities they'd never get otherwise. If some of them don't have what it takes to make it, that's not my fault." Louis nodded sympathetically. "Of course not. But these families, Eddie, they're saying they paid you money and didn't get what they expected. Parents mortgaging their homes, kids using college savings. That's got to hurt your heart, knowing they're disappointed." Sullivan stood up and walked to the window, looking out at downtown Milwaukee. When he spoke, his voice had lost some of its warmth. "Louis, let me explain something to you about the music business. Talent isn't enough. These kids, they think because they can play a little trumpet or piano, they're going to be the next Louis Armstrong. But they don't understand what it takes. The sacrifice, the connections, the politics." Louis leaned forward. "So, you're trying to teach them about reality?" "I'm giving them a chance to learn. The $500 they pay, that's not just for studio time. It's for education. It's for understanding that success costs money, that dreams don't come free. And the ones who can't afford to pay more after the first $500? Sullivan turned back to face Louis. His expression was harder now, less friendly. "Those are the ones who didn't really want it bad enough. If you're not willing to invest everything in your dream, then you don't deserve to achieve it." Louis felt his stomach turn. Sullivan wasn't just running a scam. He genuinely believed he was providing a service. In his mind, he was teaching children about the harsh realities of the music business by crushing their dreams and stealing their money. "Eddie," Louis said carefully, "what about the kids whose families don't have any more money to invest? The ones who are already risking everything?" Sullivan's laugh was cold. "Then they should have thought about that before they decided to chase fantasies. The music business isn't a charity, Louis. You of all people should know that." That's when Louis Armstrong showed Eddie Sullivan who he really was beneath the easy smile and jovial persona. "Eddie, you're absolutely right. The music business isn't a charity, but it's also not supposed to be a con game that preys on children." Sullivan's expression changed immediately. The friendly host disappeared, replaced by something much more dangerous. "What did you just say to me?" Louis stood up, matching Sullivan's intimidating posture with calm determination. "I said you're running a con game, Eddie. You're stealing money from kids and their families, and you're doing it with contracts designed to be legal, but completely dishonest." "You need to be very careful, Louis," Sullivan said, his voice dropping to a threatening whisper. "You're in my city, on my radio station, talking to someone who's made your career possible. Without my show, you're just another trumpet player competing with 1,000 other musicians for attention?" "Maybe," Louis said. "But with your show, I'm apparently just another musician who's supposed to stay quiet while you destroy children's lives." The confrontation escalated quickly from there. Sullivan threatened to blacklist Louis from every radio station in the Midwest. He promised to tell his listeners that Louis was ungrateful, difficult to work with, and not worth supporting. He painted a picture of professional ruin that would have terrified most entertainers. Louis listened to every threat with the same calm expression he'd worn while facing down lynch mobs in Mississippi and confronting segregationists in the South. When Sullivan finished, Louis smiled. "Eddie, are you done?" "I'm just getting started." "Good, because now it's my turn." What happened next became legend in Milwaukee's music community, though the full story wasn't revealed until years later. Louis reached into his briefcase and pulled out a folder containing photographs, financial records, and sworn statements from 17 different families who had been victimized by Sullivan's scam. The private detective had been even more thorough than Louis had hoped. "Eddie, this is evidence of fraud, false advertising, and conspiracy to commit theft. My lawyer estimates that you've stolen over $20,000 from families in the past 2 years alone." Sullivan's face went pale. "Where did you get this?" "From the kids you cheated, Eddie. Turns out they're not as powerless as you thought. They're just too decent to fight dirty until someone teaches them how. Louis pulled out a second set of documents. These are copies of complaint letters that are being filed with the Federal Communications Commission, the Wisconsin Attorney General's office, and the Better Business Bureau. All of them document your fraudulent business practices. Sullivan sat down heavily in his chair. You're bluffing. Am I? Let me tell you what's going to happen next, Eddie. Tomorrow morning, the Milwaukee Journal is running a story about young musicians being scammed by a local radio personality. They won't name you directly, but everyone in the city will know who they're talking about. Louis leaned forward, his voice deadly serious. The families you've hurt are filing a class action lawsuit against you and your production company. The FCC is opening an investigation into whether your radio license should be revoked, and most importantly, every musician in this city now knows what you've been doing to kids. Sullivan's confidence crumbled. Louis, you don't understand. This could destroy everything I've built. It should destroy everything you've built, Eddie. You've been poisoning the music community from the inside. But what about us? What about our friendship? I made your career in this city. Louis stood up and walked to the door. Before leaving, he turned back to face the man who had once been his supporter and was now revealed as a predator. Eddie, you're right about one thing. You did help my career, and for that, I'm grateful. But helping me doesn't give you the right to hurt children, and our friendship doesn't obligate me to stay silent while you destroy dreams. Louis paused, his hand on the doorknob. I'm giving you one chance, Eddie. You can shut down your talent program, refund every penny you've stolen, and publicly apologize to the families you've hurt. Do that, and I'll consider asking the families to drop their lawsuits. And if I refuse, then you'll discover that Louis Armstrong has friends too. Musicians, lawyers, journalists, and civil rights activists who care about protecting children from men like you. Louis walked out of the radio station and never spoke to Eddie Sullivan again. The scandal broke exactly as Louis had predicted. The Milwaukee Journal ran a front-page story about the talent discovery scam that had victimized local families. Within hours, other newspapers picked up the story. By the end of the week, national publications were covering the scandal. Sullivan tried to fight back, using his radio show to paint himself as the victim of jealous musicians and greedy lawyers. But the evidence against him was overwhelming, and his own words in the conversation with Louis had been secretly recorded by the private detective. The FCC revoked Sullivan's broadcasting license. The Wisconsin Attorney General filed criminal charges. The families won their class action lawsuit and recovered most of their stolen money. Sullivan's career was finished, but the most devastating blow came from the music community itself. Musicians who had once appeared on Sullivan's show publicly condemned his actions. Radio stations across the country banned him from their airwaves. The man who had once been the most powerful voice in Midwest radio became a pariah overnight. Louis Armstrong paid a price for his courage. Several radio stations in cities where Sullivan had influence stopped playing Louis's records. Some venues canceled bookings. For a few months, Louis's career suffered as Sullivan's allies tried to punish him for exposing the scam. But the damage was temporary. Other DJs, inspired by Louis's moral courage, began playing his music more frequently. Musicians who respected his willingness to protect young artists spoke out in his support. Within a year, Louis was more popular than ever, his reputation enhanced rather than harmed by his decision to fight for children's dreams. The real victory, though, came in the form of a letter Louis received 6 months after Sullivan's downfall. Dear Mr. Armstrong, the letter read, my name is Bobby Chen, and I wanted to let you know that I've been accepted to the Eastman School of Music with a full scholarship. I start classes next month, and I know I'll never be able to repay you for what you did. But I want you to know that every note I play for the rest of my life will be dedicated to the man who taught me that some people still fight for what's right. Thank you for giving me back my dreams. Bobby Chen. Attached to the letter was a photograph of Bobby in his high school graduation gown, holding his trumpet and smiling the same confident smile that Louis remembered from his own youth. Louis kept that letter and photograph on his dressing room mirror for the rest of his career. Whenever he doubted himself, whenever he wondered if standing up for others was worth the professional cost, he would look at Bobby's smile and remember why some things matter more than career success. In 1965, when Louis Armstrong was awarded an honorary doctorate from the University of Wisconsin, Bobby Chen was in the audience. He was finishing his master's degree and preparing for a career as a professional musician and music teacher. After the ceremony, he approached Louis backstage. "Mr. Armstrong," Bobby said, "I wanted to thank you again for what you did." Louis smiled, the same warm smile that had charmed the world. "Bobby, you don't need to thank me. You did the hard work. You're the one who turned your life around. But you gave me the chance to do that. You made it possible." Louis looked at the confident young man Bobby had become, at the success he'd earned through talent and determination rather than schemes and false promises. "Bobby, let me tell you something about chances. Everyone deserves a fair chance to pursue their dreams. What I did was make sure you got the chance you'd already earned. The rest was all you." As Louis walked away that day, he carried with him the knowledge that sometimes the most important performance of an artist's career happens off stage, in the quiet moments when nobody's watching, when the only audience that matters is your own conscience. Eddie Sullivan never recovered from the scandal. He left Milwaukee in disgrace and died in obscurity 10 years later. But the children he tried to destroy went on to build beautiful lives. Some became professional musicians, others found different paths, but all of them carried with them the lesson Louis Armstrong had taught them, that standing up for yourself and others is worth any cost. The story of Louis Armstrong and the Big Voice Sullivan scandal became a cautionary tale in the music business. It reminded managers, agents, and radio personalities that talent deserves respect, that dreams aren't commodities to be exploited, and that sometimes the most powerful voice in the room belongs to someone willing to speak truth to power. Years later, when young musicians asked Louis Armstrong for advice about the music business, he would always tell them the same thing. "Talent will take you far, but character will take you farther. And if you ever have to choose between success and doing what's right, choose right. The success that matters will follow." That's the real legacy of Louis Armstrong. Not just the man who made beautiful music, but the man who used his voice to protect those who couldn't protect themselves. The man who proved that sometimes the most important song you can sing isn't written in notes and measures, but in choices and consequences, and the simple refusal to let bullies prey on children's dreams. In the end, that's what wonderful music really sounds like. The sound of someone using their power to lift others up instead of tear them down. The harmony of justice served and dreams protected. The rhythm of a conscience that never learned to keep quiet when children needed a champion. Bobby Chen kept his promise. Every note he played for the rest of his career was a tribute to the man who taught him that dreams are worth fighting for, that talent deserves respect, and that sometimes the greatest musicians are the ones who use their voices not just to entertain, but to protect, to inspire, and to remind the world that every child's dream matters, regardless of the color of their skin or the size of their parents' bank account. That's the song Louis Armstrong was really playing all along, the music of human dignity, performed one heroic act at a time.